Hello and good morning and welcome. I'm Leonardo McClarty. I'm president of the Howard County Chamber and like to welcome each of you to what we have affectionately coined Coffee and Candidates. And this is the Howard County Chamber's um, foray into just really allowing members of the Howard County community, particularly those that are employers, to be able to hear from our candidates on the issues as it relates to business and economic development, workforce development, housing, ultimately, just so you have a clear understanding of where the candidates stand on the issues, particularly in some instances, if you have not made a decision as to who your candidate is, or in other cases, if you have and you just want to maybe have it reiterated as to why you're choosing that particular person. But this is another way of voter education, and certainly something that we believe is extremely important for our residents here in Howard County and the like. And so over the next half hour to 40 minutes or what have you, we're going to have a series of questions that will be asked, and each candidate will have a couple of minutes or so to be able to just share their thoughts. This isn't like I guess you could say, formal debate where they will question one another or what have you, but rather they'll get the questions from me that they've been provided in advance. There's no surprises here, but ultimately just an opportunity for them to state their particular platforms. One of the things we're always clear to share is that the Chamber does not endorse candidates. We certainly at various times will take positions on issues that we feel are important, again, to employers, but certainly do not take positions on people. And so with that, I want to thank both Bill Campbell as well as Christiana Rigby for sharing their morning with us. Certainly, I understand with, I think from talking with Bill earlier, his days are a little behind him, but Christiana and I certainly are still having to deal with the sometimes the children issues when you have a schedule and their schedule is not yours. But thank you for being able to join us here this morning. And so we're going to jump right into things. I'm going to ask Bill, if you would share with us just a little bit about yourself and ultimately why you're interested in this particular seat.
Thank you, Leonardo. My name's Bill Campbell. I've been a resident of Howard County for 48 years. I live in Columbia in Owen Brown Village. I came here sailing out of Baltimore as a Marine officer for 7 years. And when my wife and I were getting married, we wanted to find a place where we could raise our children. At that time, Baltimore area was a very racially segregated area. And we chose Columbia because we wanted our children to have friends of all colors, shapes, and sizes. I came ashore and I became an employee of the federal government for 30 years. I went up the ranks and I became a member of the Senior Executive Service. I was the chief engineer for the Naval Supply Systems Command for 6 years and fixed the $600 toilet seat and $400 hammer problem they had. I got recruited back to the Coast Guard to become their first chief financial officer, and they became, under my leadership, the first and only armed force ever to get a clean audit opinion. And then I was recruited by the Veterans Affairs Administration to come over and be their assistant secretary for management and chief financial officer. After leaving government service, I was the chief financial officer for Amtrak. And I've been a small business owner since I left Amtrak in 2009. I'm running because I want to get children out of relocatable classrooms. In my opinion, they're trailers. I don't believe that they're safe. I want to make sure that our children and their teachers are behind concrete block walls and steel doors for their own safety. And the fact that we have 9%, 5,500 students in 222 trailers in the sixth wealthiest county in the country is a disgrace. That's why I'm in the race. I'm angry about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Christiana.
Thank you. So my background, I am born, raised, and returned to Howard County. I'm now raising my kids that you heard about. It's our first summer of camp, which has been educational. But I am really running to continue some of the great work that we've started over the past 4 years. I in particular have worked to raise the school facilities surcharge to address some of those issues. We are doing well on our capital budget finances for the school system. We fully funded their capital request this past year, and we were able to direct more funds to the teachers who occupy those buildings to actually teach and educate our children. We've done a lot of great work when it comes to connectivity, complete streets. And then I would be remiss if I did not touch on all of the work that we've been doing through the pandemic. Certainly when I ran for office in 2018, I was not anticipating legislating, living, and learning through the past few years the way they have been, but you rise to meet the challenges. And so focusing on small business recovery, making sure that our residents and our businesses have the resources they need to thrive. Those are some of the reasons that I want to continue on the council, to continue a lot of the great work that we've started.
And so speaking of that, we'll stay here with you and just maybe share a little bit about your vision for economic development and how we might spur job creation in the county.
Absolutely. So a lot of that really depends on growing the reputation of Howard County as attractive for businesses and economic development. We have a great local economic development authority that does a wonderful job at supporting new and existing businesses. But I'm also really heavily focused on a general plan that expands opportunities for commercial development and incentives for small businesses in our community. There's a few key areas and corridors that have significant potential for redevelopment, for reinvestment, and job growth in our community. And I'm particularly focused on growing opportunities for investment and redevelopment at Gateway and throughout our Route 1 corridor. More and more people and businesses want to be co-located in areas that have access to housing, retail, public transportation, parks and open space, and community amenities. And I think we've really seen that through the excitement around downtown Columbia. And I think we should be tapping into that excitement to promote our job growth.
And Bill, same question for you. Share your vision again for creating an economic environment that leads to job creation and private investment.
Howard County should be just a dynamo for business development. We are surrounded by 5 counties. We are close proximity to Baltimore, the BWI Airport, the Port of Baltimore, Washington, D.C. We are divided or intersected by major rail corridors like the Brunswick Line, the Penn Line, the Camden Line, and major interstate highways and Route 1 and Route 29. So we should be the epicenter of business in Maryland. And I think that we could have a much better economic growth if we looked at some of the impediments that we have. I did an analysis last night looking at the real estate, personal property, and utility taxes, and also the piggyback income taxes. When I look at the 5 counties that surround us and Frederick County, which is almost surrounding us, we don't fare well. We are 4th out of 7 of those. Jurisdictions, and I think what we need to do is look in and see what we're spending our $2.4 billion on. Are there ways that we can do things like reduce or eliminate personal property taxes? Small businesses that have to pay personal property tax, let's say a landscaper, they're paying that personal property tax 12 months a year when perhaps they're only using their equipment 6 months a year. So I think what we need to do is have a complete top to bottom review of our regulations, our tax scheme, and try to make ourselves more attractive by reducing red tape and lowering costs for businesses.
So we're going to stay there and talk a little bit about economic environment, since you've kind of touched on that and really maybe dig a little bit deeper. And so certainly when we talk about economic development and investment, they're predicated on, regulatory predictability and so forth. And certainly this is something that the county has been praised on, in years past. And certainly I would say recently, there's been a debate, depending on who you talk to, as it relates to this predictability, and in some instances, maybe even enactment of legislation that may differ from the state and surrounding counties. And so talk a little bit about that public sentiment, if you will. Do you feel it's warranted as it relates to the county's predictability from an economic development perspective? And if so, why?
Is that for me or Christiana?
Yes, that's for you. That's for you.
Okay. One, I think we're very predictable. I think that we have fairly decent rules of engagement already, but we are approaching a time when that might be upset. Howard County has been growing explosively for 60 years, but most of that has been residential. We are running out of residential developable land unless we want to greatly increase density, and that has its own inherent problems. So I think what we need to do is look away from residential growth and look more towards commercial and business growth. And that's where I would like to spend most of my time. I think that reducing spending and reducing the costs of doing business is critical. We have a $2.4 billion annual budget. We are a big business. We need professional management. I've managed budgets up to $66 billion. And I've looked through our budget. I've looked through the school system budget. And to be quite frank, in our budget, I think there are lots of hobbies that are being funded that ought to be going towards something more critical or eliminated. There was a comment earlier about school funding. When you look at what it would cost to get those 5,500 kids out of trailers, it's going to be $1 billion. We have not come close to facing that. And in other forums, when I've brought this up, council members, incumbents have said, oh, we know that, but we haven't been able to figure out a tax to raise. I want to go through line by line in the budget, and I want to find all of those things that are less important than school construction, eliminate them or reduce them, and put that towards school construction. We also have a $500 million deferred maintenance problem with our school system. The school system went through our legislative delegation last year and asked for help.
Thank you. And we're going to, after Christiana's response, we're going to come back and talk a little bit about education, because I know that's something that's passionate to both of you. So again, Christiana, if you would just share your thoughts in terms of the regulatory environment here in the county and so forth, in terms of predictability and so forth.
Absolutely. So just as a, education lesson for folks, the state of Maryland requires that counties do a general plan. So that way we have predictability in terms of land use and growth, and that is for our residents and businesses alike. We have had an outpacing of commercial. We have many more jobs than we have homes. We have about 70% of our workforce commutes into Howard County every day. So when you see traffic on the roads, that is absolutely part of it. Workers commuting in to come to their jobs. And many of that is because they don't have an affordable place to live here. So I think that when it comes to predictability, one of the best things we can do is lay out an inclusive general plan that ensures that businesses know that they'll have the workforce that they need to meet the needs of their customers and of their business. I think that we have certainly been praised for a predictable business environment, and we've also been praised for, really investing in and protecting working people and ensuring that they are able to go and purchase their goods and services, and that they're able to have the income to essentially not live in poverty. Even though we are close, we're not wildly out of line. I think Mr. Campbell kind of pointed to it. We usually run middle of the pack, or on many other things, usually positive lists like schools, we're number one. And that is a great reputation for us. And that really continues to enhance our predictability because people know that when they come, every legislator cares deeply about schools and school funding, and especially school construction. They know that businesses matter, that employees matter, and that quality of life matters. We're a full service county, so we have a lot of senior citizens that also need support, whether that is through engagement programs, quality of life things, like our 50+ centers, which sound fluffy, but are actual lifelines for many of our seniors and keep them engaged and thriving in our community. I think moving forward, Howard County will continue to be an attractive place for new and growing businesses. And I'm committed to working with business owners and the Economic Development Authority to make that happen.
And so a couple of things here. So we've talked a little bit about, it's already been mentioned as it relates to the general plan and so forth. And so we're going to definitely talk about that. But we're going to stay, I think, on this education theme for the moment. And so, Christiana, we'll start with you. And so the first, and this is a kind of a multi-pronged question here, and ultimately just speak to how you'll support Howard County's educational standards while balancing the needs of both residents and businesses. And speaking, just overall as it relates to our schools and so forth, share your thoughts in terms of how the capital budget has also been used, and if there's anything that perhaps should be different as it relates to just whether it's the budgetary process or, I'm sorry, I'm stopping it. But ultimately just getting back to just supporting, again, education standards while balancing the needs of students and, residents and businesses, and also just overall your thoughts on the capital budget process with our Howard County schools and so forth.
Okay, this is a multi-pronged question. So I guess the first thing is, if we had magic wands, then I would absolutely change how school funding is done at the state level, especially for capital. That is one of the biggest challenges that we face. And so we really absolutely have to work with our local state delegation to get those things accomplished. We worked with them to pass the Build to Learn Act, which increased capital fund construction to Howard County. We've thankfully received significant state investment on our 3 major projects that are going on now, which are Hammond High School's renovation, the new High School 13, both which will address capacity issues, and then also Talbot Springs Elementary School, which will, again, address capacity issues. So I think that school construction funding in particular is a bit complex. It takes some time to learn it and understand it. The state is one of the biggest challenges that we have in terms of funding our school renovations. Now, on the other hand, even with challenges, you still have to find a way to thrive, right? So we don't have a magic wand. We can't get them to see that, our needs are greater than another area of the county, of the state necessarily. But when it comes to locally, I think that having the 10-year capital improvement plan from the Board of Education, having the superintendent in communication with the county executive, the school bonds, we do, between $70 and $90 million of capital bonds, and school construction is always a significant, if not half the budget for that. And that, exempting Ellicott City and our special WIFIA loan from the federal government for that. Then we also have, I'm going back to this 2-pronged question. Okay, so when it comes to school construction funding, we're doing a lot. I think that you balance the needs by surveying and checking in with your residents. You have to know where people are. We have multiple plans through Rec and Parks who look at what our residents are using and doing. And so I think it's having that communication with our residents to make sure that we're hitting the mark on what their needs are.
Thank you. And Bill. And tell me if you need me to repeat the question. Looks like, okay. Bill, same question for you. And just as it relates to, again, education and ultimately, how will you support our educational standards while balancing the needs of our residents and businesses? And then also just share your thoughts as it relates to the capital budget and our ability to meet, again, the top needs of schools. Can you hear me okay, Bill? Bill, can you hear me okay? Christiana, are you hearing me?
I can hear you, Leonardo.
Okay, all right. Seem to have lost, I can see Bill, but I seem to have lost. Bill, can you hear me?
I'm here.
Okay,
I can hear you.
Could you, okay, so it's the question's on you now, and could you hear?
You were breaking up.
Ah, interesting. Okay. So the question was related to, again, how will you support Howard County's educational standards while balancing the needs of our residents and businesses? And do you believe that our Board of Ed has used its capital budget responsibly to meet the top needs of schools?
Okay, first, we are the wealthiest jurisdiction in the state. To think that the state is going to bypass needier jurisdictions to help us with school construction, they'll always give us a little bit, but they're not going to give us enough to fix our problem. We need to look within the budget we have, the $2.4 billion that we have, and find out where our priorities are. Your budget sets your priorities. We have more this coming year, $139 million for county facility construction and only $105 construction. So I think that we have adequate resources to fix our school construction and renovation and deferred maintenance problems without depending on the state. That's I think that's a bad argument. The other thing is we brag about the quality of our school system. I have documents that I've gotten from the State Department of Education, and it looks like our salad days in education are behind us. Overall, I would rate, by looking at the state's report card on achievement, that we're about a C+ system overall. So the fact that we brag about how great our education is, it's relative. We're better than many places in Maryland. However, the middle schools and the elementary schools are not doing well at all. And when you look at the ones in District 3, that's what got me agitated to want to run. They are not making their academic achievement goals in English or mathematics. It's going to get worse because the children that require free and reduced meals and the children that are not native English speakers are doing even worse than the general population. And those students are growing in population, and the ones that so we're on the cusp of having our educational system have serious problems with the output of the workforce that our businesses are going to need. We need three things out of our school system. We need children who are literate, numerate, and articulate. We can argue about other courses we may want them to take, but they are falling behind in the basics.
Thank you. And so we're going to use this, I guess, still kind of in some respects, wrapping up education, but also segueing into still development. And so one of the things that I think both of you have, and particularly Christiana, touched on was APFO. And for those that may not be familiar, that's the Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance. And so one of the things that the APFO process is to normally adopt charts each year in June or July. As a new high school certainly is kind of rare depending upon the scenario. As the development of a new high school is rare. It's not like it's every. Depending on the scenario, major changes may be needed to the open or closed chart. And again, we'll touch bases later as it relates to what it means to have an open and closed chart, just because there's not enough time for right now. But the process outlined with community input will delay the decision by maybe the Board of Ed until perhaps at least December. As such, we may have the same council, we could have a new council. But ultimately, would you support revisiting the open closed chart as soon as the redistricting plan for 2023 is adopted by the Board of Ed, rather than waiting until July of 2023? So in essence, would you support, again, revisiting this open closed chart sooner rather than later? And we'll start with you, Bill.
Yes, I would definitely want to look at it sooner. I want to look at a whole bunch of things. And you bring up APFO. We only, as far as my reading of our ordinance, is we only look at school crowding and we look at intersections. I believe that we need a more comprehensive, adequate public facilities ordinance, and we need to look at other things that affect the quality of life in Howard County. I started to do some research on this. A lot of people don't know that the World Health Organization recommends 3 hospital beds per 1,000 residents. That would mean we would have slightly under 1,000 hospital beds in Howard County. We only have 255 at Howard County General. And even if you say that people in Ellicott City could go to St. Agnes, or somebody in Laurel could go to the hospital in Prince George's County, just looking at Columbia, we would need 330 beds just for Columbia, and we have 255. The FBI recommends 2 sworn police officers for 1,000 residents. That would mean a large increase. We would need at least 220 sworn officers just for Columbia. So I think there are a lot more things we need to include: environmental concerns, traffic and transit concerns. I think that the whole adequate public facilities ordinance thing is not completed yet.
Thank you.
Mr. McClarty, would you mind repeating the question?
Yes. So I said the APFO process is to normally adopt charts each year in June or July, as a new high school is rare. And depending on the scenario, major changes to the open closed chart will be needed. The process outlined with community input will delay the decision by the Board of Ed until at least December. As such, we may have the same council or perhaps a new council. And the question is, would you support revisiting the open closed chart as soon as the redistricting plan for 2023 is adopted by the Board of Ed, rather than waiting until July of 2023?
Yeah, so we just had this entire discussion because it is August, and like you said, it's usually discussed and adopted between June and July. One of the biggest things that came out of that discussion is the way that we collect and respond to data in that chart is in a very delayed manner. And therefore, what we end up doing is looking at data that's 2 years out of date, essentially, by the time we get to it. And I think that there was consensus in that discussion from a majority of members that we want to be looking at accurate and realistic data. So that's one of the reasons that the numbers are so different when you're looking at the feasibility study from HCPSS versus when you look at the open close chart. So I think that we'll get there. I think that I absolutely support reviewing charts so that they're accurate and germane to what the reality is. So after redistricting, there will be additional capacity. But we have this ordinance to pace our growth, to manage it. I think that there are things that are missing that can certainly be addressed. The hospital beds is completely controlled by the state. So that certainly has its challenges because they have to approve any new beds. But when it comes to things like transit or environmental concerns, affordability for housing, I think that there's a lot of room for improvement. And I think one of the biggest areas of improvement for APFO would be to work off of the most up-to-date numbers. So I would support approving the chart, but I would also support sort of shifting that time frame to the fall after you get the enrollment numbers. They don't need to be certified by MSDE because they'll be a lot closer than those 2-year-old numbers that we're looking at in the chart anyway. And I think if we want to do good work, we have to have good data. And I think that that's a big part of getting to good work.
Thank you. And so we're going to use this to really segue into the general plan. And so starting with you, Christiana. And so once each decade, the Howard County updates its general plan, which is a long-range visionary document that guides land use, growth, and development decisions. In your opinion, what should this document prioritize as it relates to neighborhoods, employment centers, and overall planning themes?
I mean, I could talk about the general plan for hours. But I think it's like a bedrock document that lays out so much for how things happen over the next decade. I think that there are significant opportunities to improve Howard County's land use patterns and practices in our new general plan. I'm supportive of the proposed concept of identifying activity centers in the general plan, which are these areas for commercial activity, housing. They include open space, and they're also multimodal transportation hubs. These mixed-use activity centers connect jobs with housing, recreation, transportation, and community facilities. And this approach to development is much better for the environment, and it's better for the commercial activity. And because single-family detached homes direct the most number of children to our schools, it's also good for our schools. So we have a strong commercial development market, and I think we can do a lot more to support that through smarter housing and transportation policies.
Thank you. I couldn't get off mute. So, Bill, same question for you. And that is as it relates to the general plan. Again, in your opinion, what should the document prioritize as it relates to neighborhoods, employment centers, and overall planning themes?
70% of our workers come from out of our jurisdiction. What we haven't discussed is that 68% of our residents work elsewhere. And so we have this tremendous back and forth for traffic, which increases congestion and frustration. It's not good for the environment, and it certainly is not good for business. What I would like to see, since we are close to two major rail lines, looking at what we can do as a demonstration project with our RTA buses, is to perhaps get community support to use the MARC rail lines or even the Amtrak rail lines. We have 3 stations within 20 miles of most of our population. So that's one of the things I would like to do. I would say that our general plan is a vision, but a vision without resources is a hallucination. And we need to make sure that whatever we decide in the plan is fully funded. I don't think that most people appreciate how complex running a large business is, and we are a large business. And so I believe that the general plan should really set the tone, and we shouldn't be changing things like zoning because somebody comes along and has a new idea. If it doesn't fit in the plan, then we should really think many times before we violate the plan or change the plan.
And so, speaking of plans, so we're in the midst of. I guess we have the pleasure of working on the general plan, but at the same time also rewriting the zoning ordinance as well. And so as we move forward with the implementation of the new general plan, also rewriting of the zoning ordinance and land use regulations will also be impacting the county as well. And so just a couple of questions here, starting with you, Bill. The first is just talk about your preparation in terms of how prepared are you to address the many issues that will confront you in this process? And also just share with us your zoning and land use philosophy.
Okay. First, let's work backwards. My zoning and land use philosophy. The first thing that I would like to make clear is that after the the last census, we did a review of the charter, and at that time, I testified before the Charter Review Commission that we should remove the county council from being the zoning board. I think that's just fraught with potentials for abuse. And that was not acted on favorably by the county council for whatever reason. But I don't think that we should have politicians that can be influenced by development money or anybody else making zoning decisions. I think that would, if there was a professional team that did that, and the county council in their oversight role could certainly review all of it, but I don't think that they should be in the position to be making the zoning decisions. Could you repeat the first part of the question, please?
Yes, the first part was just talking about your preparation in terms of how prepared are you to address the many issues that will confront you in the process of rewriting the zoning ordinance and looking at land use regulations and so forth.
Well, I've had over 30 years of executive experience, over 15 as a chief financial officer, and going through and formulating, executing, and overseeing budgets much larger than the county. And I believe that I have the capacity. I do a lot of, as you can see by me looking up what the World Health Organization recommends or the FBI recommends. I have a strong work ethic, and I know where to go and find information that I can use in formulating a sound decision. I've received the highest awards that the federal government, the President of the United States can give. I got the Distinguished Rank Award from President Clinton, and I was nominated by President George W. Bush to be a sub-cabinet officer. So I have an infinite amount of capacity to look at the problems we have and come up with a plan and work with both sides of the aisle with my colleagues to make sure that it's implemented.
Thank you. And so switching over to Christiana, again, same question, and this gets into just, again, talking about your preparation in terms of being prepared to, to handle the rewriting of the zoning ordinance and the various issues that are going to come out in that process. And then also just overall sharing your zoning and land use philosophy.
Sorry, it took me a second to find that unmute button myself. So I'll start with my land use and zoning philosophy. So it really centers around creating communities where residents and businesses can thrive and grow together. And in the past, Howard County has typically pursued Euclidean-based zoning, which tend to separate different land uses, residential, commercial, industrial, to different parts of the county. And one of the exceptions to this practice was the creation of Newtown zoning, which was very revolutionary for its time 55 plus years ago. Through the development of Columbia, because when you hear Newtown zoning, that's the zoning that makes Columbia possible. That's what makes it look the way it does. James Rouse had a vision of creating integrated communities where residents of all incomes, races, and backgrounds can live in community with each other and walk to their grocery stores, bike to their jobs, and enjoy this vast network of open space, which is one of the, top ranked things that people say why they love living in Howard County and why people love living in Columbia specifically is the access to the open space. And, the ability to have a connected neighborhood and community. And my land use and zoning philosophy really aligns with the vision that James Rouse brought to Columbia. I think that our land use and zoning decisions have fundamental impacts on what our county looks like and how our community grows and thrives together. And I think that we should continue to build on the success of that philosophy. And in regards to preparation, I'd say that after spending 4 years on the council and on the zoning board, I'm very prepared to address the many issues that will come before the council during the comprehensive rezoning process. And in that process, my top priorities are going to be promoting and incentivizing affordable housing, supporting activity centers where employment, housing, and community centers coexist and thrive together, improving community sustainability through smart housing, transportation, and land use regulations, and expanding access to critical public facilities and spaces that our community relies on, like our public schools and community parks and open space. In this process, it can be confusing for some folks to wrap their head around. I try to explain it that the general plan is setting out the menu. It's saying, do you want cake? It's not saying the kind of cake, how many layers the cake has, the type of frosting on the cake. It's just saying, do we want the option of cake? And then the comprehensive rezoning process goes into that recipe piece. How much do you want? What kind of cake do you want? How many layers? What kind of frosting? All those things of how you do it. So I think that those two pieces work together, and I think I'm very prepared to address them. And it's really incumbent on all of us who understand the process to be the biggest advocates for community engagement, to get more people involved in that process, because this county should be for all of us. So we should all be participating in the process.
Thank you. And so just so everyone will know, we've got, and as I'm looking at the clock here, we're going to have 3 more questions. And so we're going to, I think, you can't talk about zoning and everything else we've talked about and not shift and talk a little bit about transportation. And so so we're going to move in that direction now. And so this question is starting with you, Christiana, and that is, do you share the concern that our road and transit infrastructure is inadequate to accommodate the jobs and development coming to Howard County and the region?
Yes.
And then with that, what are your top priorities for transit, transportation, infrastructure, and public facilities investment in the county?
Sure. So I absolutely share that concern. It's massive. And I think we've touched on it a bit. We have this 68 and 70. And part of that is the Economic Development Authority recently, in the last 6 months, did a presentation with us, sort of going into where they're going and where people are going in different counties. I think that the remote work will have, and hopefully will continue to have, positive impacts on our community. But to address those kinds of concerns, we really need significant expansions in the availability of affordable housing, especially around some of those employment centers. When we look at the hospital, some of our major hospitality areas, they have a lot of workers commuting into them. And so I think increasing our investment in local RTA routes and employment areas, especially downtown, Gateway, the Village Center. I know many of the people on the call have probably participated in Leadership Howard County. And one of the things that I greatly appreciate that they do is they have you all ride the bus. And they have you ride the bus so that you can see how it functions or doesn't for folks. You know, we are in a place where we have a transit system that you ride by necessity. It's not necessarily by choice. And we can really work to expand some of those routes, especially up 40 for the regional development. And we can also do a better job of connecting our rail centers to our employment centers. So that way people could take the train down, and then get a bus over to Gateway. And that's going to reduce a lot of that commuting traffic, a lot of emissions, and a lot of time spent on the road. So I think that there's a lot we can do on the transit side for sort of out of county commuting. But I also think that there's a lot that we could be doing inside the county. We can be working with local employers to provide transit benefits. We can increase that service so that way it's more reliable. Both workers and businesses need predictable, reliable transportation to get to work to do their jobs. Getting to work should not be the hardest part of your day. And I think that when we're talking locally, We've done a lot of work on complete streets to make sure that people have a choice. If they have the option to not take the car, that they can actually do that now. We have different things like the scooter programs, and I see a lot of private scooters on our pathways now. We have e-bikes. I appreciate when everyone minds the 10-mile-per-hour speed limit that is on the pathways. But these micro-mobility transportation solutions that are coming out, we're really on the cusp of this technology boom. And I think that it can really help our community address a lot of our issues. But it's going to take government investment in terms of connectivity, the roadway system, and our transit system. And so I absolutely support improving that. And if anyone on this call has any interest in transportation or the general plan, please reach out, because I would love to chat with you more about it and hear your views, and also hear how we can work together.
Thank you. And so, Bill, if you would, again, share your thoughts again from a road and transit infrastructure. And again, the first question just being if you share the concern that our road and transit infrastructure is inadequate to accommodate the jobs and investment and development rather coming to Howard County and the region. And then also, what would be your top priorities for transit, transportation, infrastructure, and public facilities investment in the county?
Good deal of career in transportation and capping it with being the chief financial officer for Amtrak. I look at the road structures and I look at the geography, and we're not going to be able to pave our way out of this problem. We're going to have to look at something different. That's why I mentioned earlier, we are served by two very effective rail lines in the Camden line and the Penn line. And I think we need to perhaps do a demonstration project in cooperation with the Maryland Transportation Authority Administration and MARC trains, and see if we can get a large enough portion of our workforce to use rail by using our RTA buses to get them to and from their centers, wherever they live, and back from the rail station. That's the thing that would take the most people off the road at one time. But we're going to have to do a concept of a concept of operations, a pilot, to show MTA and MARC that this is something that is doable. As far as adequate affordable housing, I don't know a lot about affordable housing, so I started looking at it, and I have read the reviews of people who are currently living in Howard County affordable housing, particularly in District 3. And the remarks that they've left on the websites are truly disturbing. We as a county have a role in making sure that people live in safe and sanitary conditions. And when I read the write-ups that are coming from people about rats and mice, crime, people afraid to go out at night, people afraid to walk their dogs, I think what we need to do is address those issues before we create new problems, pockets of poverty for people, because we want to get on the bandwagon to have more affordable housing. I think we need a comprehensive review of how affordable housing is working in Howard County before we expand it.
Thank you. And so with that, we're going to shift into the budget. And so ultimately, and so, certainly we understand that in many respects, there are a lot more maybe needs and so forth than maybe we have resources for. But ultimately, what do you see as the biggest challenge for the county budget, and how do you plan to address these fiscal constraints? And we'll start with you, Bill.
Well, as I said earlier, I think that the number one concern that I find when I go around and talk to Howard County residents is education. And although we have done a decent job on funding school operations, we've done a horrible job. We've been kicking the can down the road on school construction for at least 10 years. we need to address that. As far as school performance, when I read the 668-page 2023 budget submission from the Board of Education, I was really concerned because I didn't see where enough resources were being put to reduce the achievement gap between Asian and white students and African American and Hispanic students. I also didn't see where the rise in Hispanic students was leading to more support for those, particularly who are not English speakers. So I think that that's a horrible problem we have, and we have to address it. I was disappointed that the school system didn't ask for. I was disappointed that the school system hasn't stood up on a table and screamed at the top of their lungs that they need construction money. I don't know why that's true, but we need to get the county government with the executive, the county council, the Board of Education, and the school administration to work on an overall plan and then have us fund it. And I think that we didn't get in this problem overnight, but we are certainly in it now. 86% of our school buildings are over 20 years old. As an engineer, I know at that point they need new roofs, new HVAC, maybe some new doors and windows, and upgrades to facilities. So I think that is a huge problem we have not addressed. And I think that the money is in the budget to do that. We've also made some, I think, horrendous mistakes. We're spending $182 million of county money in downtown Columbia. We're going to probably have the only fire station that I have ever seen that will have 900 units of housing on top of them out of the 1,700 units we're going to have adding in downtown Columbia. And that's an apartment fire on one of those 900 units is quite possible. It will wipe out the fire station.
Thank you. And with that, we'll ask the same question to Christiana.
Would you be able to repeat the question?
Yes, it's just, considering our fiscal challenges, what do you see as the biggest challenge for the county budget, and how do you plan to address these fiscal constraints?
Well, with the exception of FY23, our government, the Howard County's revenue rate has slowed over the past few years as our county has continued to develop and grow. And I think moving forward, we have significant initiatives and efforts that the county is committed to addressing that we are legally required to address, like the blueprint for Maryland's future requirements. And so that will be one of the biggest challenges that we will need to meet while working with our school system. I think that trust and communication is one of the most important things in that process. And I'm very glad that the superintendent and the executive and the school board and the council have all really worked to come together and be on the same page in recent years, because we've seen that when we work together, we're able to achieve better outcomes for Howard County. Things like getting all of those school projects funded that I mentioned. We are also going to need to continue to work with our state partners to identify new revenue sources that meet those needs. And I am really hopeful that the legalization and taxation of cannabis will be one way that we can meet the blueprint for Maryland Future's needs. I think that we need to continue spending our county dollars wisely to ensure that our return on investment benefits our community. And lastly, we only have 2% of Howard County available for new development, which means that as a government, I think we've been very dependent on that source of revenue. And we really need to reorient our thinking to how we're going to thrive for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And how do we do it in a way that is sustainable, that meets the needs of our community, and is very forward thinking so that we're not repeating some of the same mistakes of the past.
Thank you. And this will be our last question. And it's simple and in the sense that it's, so in Christiana's case, you're reelected and you think, 4 years from now, what would you envision being some of your most significant accomplishments?
Well, I think that we can really get serious on climate change. The council just passed a power purchase agreement, which will deliver over 70% of renewable energy to Howard County government. So I think that's a good step, that we are managing our own energy wisely and affordably for the county. But I think that there is more that we can do. I think that I really hope that my biggest accomplishment is that we had a thorough and engaged general plan process where members of the community felt heard, that their concerns were acted upon, and that they really got to participate in this community process where we really are coming together to decide how we want to live and what our vision for our community is. So that's what I'm looking forward to over the next 4 years.
And conversely, Bill, should you be elected and you're looking back 4 years from now, what would you like to see as what would you envision as being some of your most significant accomplishments?
Oops. From everybody that I talk to is reforming education. What I would like to do, the Board of Ed and the school superintendent have the lead on that, but we have a support role. We're the ones that are supposed to fully fund everything. So what I want to do is if I were to be elected and leave in 4 years, I want to look back and see that there is a plan to fully fund all of our required school construction. Looking at having 13 high schools, that tells me basically we need 91 schools instead of 78. We need to fund that. We need to take care of the deferred maintenance. Those would be the biggest things that I would do. The other thing would be trying to reduce transportation snarls. And as I said, I'd like to see a pilot project to try to get people off of the roads and onto rail, because the majority of our commuters that leave the county go to Washington, D.C. or Northern Virginia, and some of them go to Baltimore. So those would be the biggest things. But I'd also like to see where we really do get engagement from the public. I mentioned earlier the Charter Review Commission. The county council, the incumbent county council, turned down the recommendation that they stop being the zoning board. There was also another recommendation they made that I testified on, in expanding the council membership to 7 council districts. That would give Elk Ridge, North Laurel, and Savage 2 seats. Right now, we are a Columbia-centric county. 60% of our council members are basically elected out of Columbia, and Columbia makes up 1/3 of the county. We also don't have a single county. We basically got 3. Everything east of Route 1 is different from Columbia, which is different from Western Howard County. The Columbia model doesn't fit the entire county, and we got to stop thinking about Columbia only.
Thank you. And with that, that will wrap us up for today. And so I want to thank Christiana and Bill for sharing their thoughts. Also want to thank the both of you for your commitment and dedication to the county. Certainly, it's an unselfish act for anyone to choose to run for public office, recognizing the time that you end up giving to your citizens that could be given to family and friends and so forth. So thank you to you both. Just a few closing comments on this end. The first is we'll be back on the 16th, and we'll be shifting gears and going west, as we will be focusing on District 5. And so join us at 8 o'clock on August 16th. And then also, staying in this election season, 2 upcoming chamber events that also we want to bring your attention is next week on the 9th is our annual elected officials meet and greet, where you'll have an opportunity to meet both candidates for office and those that are currently in office. And this is in a very relaxed format in an after hours setting. We'll be over at the rooftop in the Tenable building overlooking Columbia. And so should be a great evening. And then also on the 16th during the lunchtime hour, we will have a county executive forum that we'll be using our executive speaker series for. And so we'll have with us County Executive Calvin Ball and former County Executive Alan Kittleman with us. And that will be a moderated discussion featuring Kate Hetherington, retired president from Howard Community College, Milton Matthews, who was a retired executive from Columbia Association, and Stacy Hunt, who was recently retired president from Leadership Howard County. And so again, should be a great discussion on the 16th. With that, thank you all and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.